Unsheath your dagger definitions. Hoarseness is the whatness of all horse. Streams of tendency and aeons of worship. God, noise in the street, very peripatetic. Good evening of the long days, hard nights, bright dawn. Today we will discuss black magic, Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake, and Everywhere at the End of Time. These three artworks, through the use of words or sound, bring about a kind of transformative mental alchemy, utilizing the seed of schizophrenia and dementia within all of us. The brink of madness stalks the periphery, whether a figure in the corner of your eye or a tree that nods in collusion. With these three works, the listener or reader experiences a momentary altered state of consciousness. Many pieces of music or literature make people feel emotion, but these two have a much more transformative and possessive quality. I'll now give a short introduction to Ulysses by James Joyce. It is a modernist novel spanning a single day, that being June 16th, 1904. It takes place in Dublin, following the lives of Leopold Bloom, Stephen Dedalus, and Molly Bloom. It parallels Homer's Odyssey, detailing ordinary life, inner thoughts, and Irish society through diverse, challenging styles. The narrative covers themes of exile, fatherhood, sexuality, and daily struggle. Now for an introduction to Everywhere at the End of Time by The Caretaker, whose real name is Leyland Kirby. It is a 6.5 hour, 6-stage ambient electronic project that simulates the progression of Alzheimer's or dementia. Using distorted ballroom recordings, it tracks the journey from initial nostalgia to final memory loss, chaos, and total cognitive decay. To draw some parallels, I will now read some quotes from the book The Neuropsychology of Schizophrenia, Volume 1, published in 1992. This is from Section 9, Theory of Mind and Schizophrenia. It's on the alienating effects of schizophrenia. Many of the signs and symptoms of schizophrenia can be understood as arising from impairments in processes underlying theory of mind, such as the ability to represent beliefs and intentions. Patients with delusions of reference and persecution can represent that other people have different beliefs and intentions from themselves, but have difficulty inferring the content of these beliefs and intentions. So this is meaning they recognize that others do not see or hear what they hear, and they see this lack of acknowledgement of their sensory experience as being oppositional, making them feel alienated and as if no one understands them. So the text goes on to say, patients with auditory hallucinations and delusions of control cannot distinguish between representations of beliefs and intentions and representations of directly perceived events. As a consequence, representations of their own intentions are experienced as alien forces controlling their actions, meaning they lose sight of their sense of self as it is usurped by the many voices that haunt them. They can no longer sort between their own thoughts and those of the parasitic voices the disease channels into them. These voices transmogrify their perceptions with pareidotic illusions or insight. As the rain of the exterior becomes the rain of the interior, as the sound of raindrops hitting a tin roof transform into the chattering of many voices, forming a kaleidoscope of musical hallucinations. This begs the question, do schizophrenics see what was there all along but remains hidden to everyday perception? Joycean schizologic provides the blueprint for gaining these insights through language. During psychosis, all speech is filtered through what's called apophenia. This phenomena is well documented. Apophenia and delusions of reference. This is the unmotivated seeing of connections, accompanied by a specific feeling of abnormal meaningfulness. A person might believe that a news anchor is talking directly to them, that headlines are encoded coded messages, or that a song on the radio is predicting their future. There is also overactive semantic network. Research into this phenomenon suggests this tendency is caused by a hyperpriming effect, where the brain activates too many associations for a given word or concept, causing unrelated concepts to appear related. So these transmogrifications, or you could say the transformative mogging of schizophrenia, forces upon them connections they would not have made otherwise. They drift between the inner and outer body, between the outer body experience of metempsychosis and the in-body experience of reality. The metempsychosis is a Greek term that translates as put a soul into. Psychosis comes from the Greek word psyche, meaning soul, mind, and breath. Meta means something that is self-referential, analytical, or transcends its subject, often meaning beyond or after in Greek, such as in metaphysics. In the case of Joyce's writing, it also possesses schizophrenic transcendence in that his sentences have a manner of fusing connections and metamorphosing objects with delusions of reference and apophenia into something entirely unexpected, as if he had an overactive semantic network, as mentioned before. Schizophrenics at the height of their mania can make prophetic connections as spirits speak through them. The prophets of the past were able to transcend the limitations of mind, drawing in voices from above to make predictions. The Holy Spirit, which is the intermediary between a human conduit and God, is effectively channeling an outside voice into your mind. These voices can be demonic or holy. Schizophrenic logic is often disorganized, but occasionally they bring back class of the philosopher's stone from the brink of madness. This is summed up in the quote from Job 12:22. He discovereth deep things out of the darkness, and bringeth out to light the shadow of death. Or when the voices are intent on harm, cite Job 15:21. A dreadful sound is in his ears. In prosperity the destroyer shall come upon him. So Carl Jung thought Joyce to be a functioning schizophrenic, and his suspicion of his being so arose from the complex and fragmented nature of Ulysses, especially Joyce's invention of the stream of consciousness technique that has the intensity of psychotic monologues, speaking from pure intuition, directly from the unconscious or subconscious. Joyce's writing is as if a schizophrenic managed to retain full lucidity at the height of psychosis. He projects his consciousness out into the world of thingness and draws into himself the logic of spirit. When this madness finally clicks for you, the language is spellbinding. To allow the language to take hold of you, you must bypass the analytical mind and read the words out loud as if reciting a mantra, remembering not all mantras are short and concise. Some Tibetan mantras are 8 to 10 hours long and have very complex language. Terence McKenna, who was obsessed with Finnegan's Wake, said of the style of prose that the language casts a spell on you, and you find yourself talking in the strange puns and hallucinatory grammar of Finnegan's Wake. This effect is very similar to how many report loss of memory and slowness of mind after listening to the entirety of Everywhere at the End of Time, meaning the experience of dementia it simulates has a lasting effect. This also parallels how a witch's curse can enter the subconscious and create strange neuroses within the victim. Now read another quote from the Neuropsychology of Schizophrenia on this phenomenon called parasitic memories. Verbal hallucinations derive from parasitic memories, which disrupt language production processes and episodically co-opts these processes. Now, I do not intend to make light of the horrors of schizophrenia in any way whatsoever with this connection. On a personal note, I myself have suffered severe psychosis, and so has my dearest friends. So trust me, I certainly know how horrible it can be. I want to say in some ways this is why I feel so strongly about Joyce, because he speaks a language that those of us who have had psychotic episodes can understand, and the fact that he transformed it into something brilliant is obviously very inspiring. So his language represents the prophetic good trip of high mania rather than the paranoid bad trip of paranoid schizophrenia. Many do not admit that there is this dynamic interplay of yin and yang with psychosis. So maybe the spell Terence McKenna talks of is similar to a parasitic memory in that when you allow it to, it can truly take you over, opening up psychic doors of perception previously unknown to the reader. Joyce's language rerouting the logical hardwiring of your mind. For me, and I'm sure countless others, his writings help me make sense of the asymmetrical structure of the disorganized thoughts I was having in manic states, crystallizing them into a kind of logic from which art could be made. This is why I dislike the notion of Joyce being pretentious, which a lot of people say. He had ambitious pretensions, to be sure, but what did he really do with his life? He sacrificed 12 to 15 hours a day writing Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, whilst in severe pain and slowly going blind, to the point where at the end of the 17 years he spent writing Finnegan's Wake, his sight was so bad that he used giant scrolls of paper on the floor, writing each letter as large as possible so he could actually make out what he was writing. So love him or hate him, it was obvious that he dedicated his entire life to study and writing, to make works of art that everyone can draw inspiration from. This type of dedication is rarely seen, if at all, in today's world. Now I'll give a personal account of my own experience of parasitic memories. One night when I was getting the train home, at a time when I was at the height of substance-induced psychosis, as I sat on the train, these three people sat in front of me having a conversation, likely about something mundane, but in the state I was in, I was hearing all sorts of hidden meanings. When I got off the train, that very conversation and the now disembodied voices began playing as a loop in my head, overlapping, fragmenting and distorting, as if a part of me was still on the train listening to them through a kind of remote viewing. With each repetition of the convo came new alterations. The voices were fragmenting in a way that a few years later, when I had the transcendent experience of first hearing Everywhere at the End of Time, the degradation of the musical motifs that form the foundation of the composition seemed eerily similar, as static noise was passing through the timbre of the voices I was hearing, as if something was disrupting the signal like a radio losing a station. These voices were like an alien force that hijacked my mind. The specificities of what happened that night is hazy, other than small fragments, but I can make an estimate upon many other similar experiences I have had in the same state of psychosis, in which the mundane becomes the profane. Everything is heard as a kind of twilight language. This metamorphosed language makes the schizophrenic mind forget its original source and begin believing the conversation is some sort of divine prophecy. This incident on the train makes me think of the Nietzsche quote, which my believing of this quote having anything to do with my individual experience being an example of apophenia. The quote reads as such: "You know these things as thoughts, but your thoughts are not your experiences. They are an echo and after effect of your experiences. As when your room trembles when a carriage goes past, I, however, am sitting in the carriage, and often I am the carriage itself." Part of the hypnotic quality of Joyce's writing comes from the musical qualities present in the way he would structure each sentence. Joyce was an avid singer and guitarist who in his early days wished to be a musician rather than a writer. He always thought of sentences being like a melody with tension and resolve, crescendos and diminuendos. He thought of combinations of words being like melodic cells in music with loops and repeating motifs. Sometimes it is like counterpoint, rational and robust. Other times it is like the stochastic music of Iannis Xenakis, which is dense and fractal-like with the structure of a brain map of synaptic plasticity. Shamans said of schizophrenics that they suffer from being too open, meaning they have no barrier to entry into the portal of their psyche. We who do not suffer from this illness have to work on quieting our thoughts to allow a particular work to enter into us and take possession of our mind. Our ability correlates to how much we give ourselves over to something, whereas the schizophrenic's own thoughts become almost completely replaced by frequencies of an other. They are like an antenna picking up every nearby frequency, whereas we are much more like a radio that has to be tuned to pick up a clear signal. For schizophrenics, to use a phrase from Finnegan's Wake, here comes everybody, all the time, all at once. My reason for bringing magic into this is to show how language is magic itself. Take a magical grimoire. Grimoire is the Latin word for grammar. Repetition of certain phrases shifts energy within. So in effect, all magic is language, all language is magic. Mantras are charged with energy, and the longer you repeat them, the greater effect you feel. Through intensive focus on these particular words in a mantra, making them charged with energy. Mantras accrue a kind of spirit body throughout the ages. Positive affirmations repeated over and over until you have no intuitive doubt in your mind upon stating the affirmation is how you tune your subconscious to your desires. If we take the example of how a witch or magician would go about cursing someone effectively. Now I will discuss the science of witchcraft and the neurological implication of curses. Witches and sorcerers used to trick someone into drinking a potion that they are led to believe is alcohol. In actuality, this potion was made up of a mixture of psychedelics, or as it was referred to in those times, witch's brew. Once the victim became intoxicated, they would hypnotize the victim by reciting curses. This is similar to how modern-day hypnotists hypnotize their patients using repetition and other tactics. But obviously, hypnotists do this for a positive alchemical transformation of mind. But if they so wish to bring about a negative transformation, they could do so using the same techniques with a different intention, bearing in mind that hypnosis has now been scientifically proven. In this hypnotic state where the victim is highly suggestible, they are able to trick them into believing they are having a particular experience, such as losing the use of a particular limb. The psychedelics help bypass the conscious mind and push the curse into the subconscious. After the witch's brew wears off and the victim awakes the following day, they would find they have no recollection of what had occurred. This blackout of memory is due to the witches having used a combination of datura, psilocybin, and most importantly, scopolamine, or as it is known colloquially, devil's breath. Scopolamine induces a suggestible state, causing severe amnesia. As many of you may know, in the modern day, criminals use scopolamine to get victims to empty their bank accounts or whatever else the criminal desires them to do. So this victim, upon awakening, would find themselves strangely convinced that one of their limbs was no longer functioning. Maybe they even touch the limb to see if it is still there or still functioning. Of course, they know that it is, but they feel something is off. And throughout the coming weeks, they keep checking themselves over and over, becoming increasingly convinced something had happened to this limb. And through directing all of this mental energy into this belief, slowly but surely, this makes the brain begin to see the limb as dysfunctional, and as consequence the brain begins to disrupt the call and response between it and the affected limb. This neurological dysfunction begins to cause pain and discomfort to the victim. This type of curse that disturbs the mind and has the victim imagining they've lost a limb is documented in the famous text on witchcraft, published in 1468 by Heinrich Kramer under the title of Malleus Maleficarum. or the hammer of witches. I will now read a quote from Part 1, Section 35a. When it is strong in imagination, the soul by itself at the mere internal apprehension concerning something external changes sometimes its own body, meaning the witch's body, and sometimes someone else's, i.e. an external body, the witch's victim in this case. For example, a person walking on a plank placed over the deep readily falls because he imagines his fall as a result of fear, but he would not fall if that plank was placed on the ground where he could not fear falling. The text here mentions that he falls because he becomes overwhelmed by the consequence of his falling. This is to exemplify the power of internal belief having consequences on the body, just as the brain convinces itself and acts as if it has lost a limb because the mind constantly imagines and believes it has. Now here is the scientific implication. This article on what is called a functional neurological disorder is from PubMed Central. It states that constant vivid imagination of having lost a limb or intensive focus on a limb being dead or immobile can cause the brain to begin to paralyze that limb, acting as if it is truly lost or dysfunctional. This phenomenon is supported by neuroscientific research into brain plasticity and functional neurological disorder. This is how brain plasticity and frozen limbs work. Firstly, the brain maintains a detailed map of the body. If a person loses a limb, the brain may enter into a state known as a frozen phantom limb, where it retains a map of the limb but experiences it as paralyzed or stuck in a painful, unnatural position. Then concerning mental imagery and paralysis, studies show that purely imagined body constraints, such as imagining an arm is paralyzed or useless, can selectively inhibit the corticospinal functions of that limb. In experiments, participants instructed to imagine their arm was paralyzed showed reduced motor cortex excitability, acting as if the limb was dead. This functional neurological disorder is a real disorder in which the brain struggles to send or receive signals to and from parts of the body properly. The brain basically misinterprets or disengages from the limb, leading to genuine experience paralysis, even though there is no structural damage to the nerves or muscles. So in conclusion, this is the science of witchcraft. Contrary to popular belief of these things being old wives' tales of witches magically causing a limb to disappear in the literal sense, it was actually far more complex and malevolent, as even Heinrich Kramer understood back in the 1400s by detailing how witches would use fear and hypnotic states to induce an irrational neurotic belief that a limb that was in actual fact still there was gone or dysfunctional, and how this belief was as good as a dead limb actual because of the powers of the mind. We would now understand this to be a case of negative plasticity, which is the brain's capacity to remodel itself in harmful, maladaptive ways, strengthening unhealthy neural pathways rather than productive ones. Examples include the development of chronic pain, obsessive-compulsive behaviors, addiction, and cognitive decline. This shows how language is the master key to either positive or negative transformations. The energy we infuse in words and phrases is what changes the brain. Maybe Joyce used his writing to escape giving in to his madness. Leyland Kirby worked in nursing homes, and maybe he wanted the world, who often blindly ignore such things, to understand the true horror of dementia, to bring about a more empathetic understanding of what people who suffer from it experience. We often only understand these things in the abstract, and thus we don't feel the emotions of the experience, and that makes it so many struggle to relate. And that's why his work is so amazingly powerful, for it gives us direct insight, quite literally putting us in the patient's shoes, or brain for that matter, through the phenomenon of rhythmic entrainment, which is where repetition in music synchronizes to our brain waves and creates a hypnotic state that lowers analytical resistance and heightens emotional suggestibility. Okay, well that will about do it for today's video. If you've listened this far, I'm forever grateful to you. This is the first serious video I've made. At this point I have 6 subscribers, of which I'm very grateful for. All music in today's video was played by me. I'm going to make my own YouTube channel for my music called bhalu924 Dismay. It should be up in the next week or so. I've got a few little projects that I'm going to release. So yeah, like and subscribe. Follow me on Substack. I'll be making more videos very soon. Thank you very much.